Good evening from our headquarters in Kiev. This is This Sunday show at Hromadske International, the only prime-time discussion in English explaining Eastern European geopolitical storm, and I'm Natalia Humaniuk. And of course, it's 1 week. We are expecting Ukraine elects a president. There is a lot of discussions, and in order to discuss not just what Ukrainians are thinking, what's going on, what we can expect after the elections. So I would like to, first of all, present our extraordinary panel. We have Andreas Umland, who is a senior research fellow at the Institute for Euro-Atlantic Cooperation. We have Andrei Kulikov, who is the chairman of the board of Hromadske Radio and my colleague here. Vladislav Davidzon is editor-in-chief of the Odessa Review, and Olexii Semenii is the political analyst, director of the Institute for Global Transformations. And first of all, besides, we would probably start and remind our audience that according to the polls done by the sociological group Ratings, there were up to 60% who are supporting Volodymyr Zelenskiy as a candidate, an actor, a comedian actor, and the current president has a bit more than 24%. I have to also stress that this poll has been conducted, the survey carried out by the sociological group from the 5th till 10th of April, and there were 3,000 respondents with a margin error of 1.8%. So that's what we have. So it's kind of a huge gap, but maybe we would start from something else, because today there was an interesting event. The President Poroshenko was participating in the mono debates, let's say, at the National Stadium. Volodymyr Zelenskiy didn't come. Volodymyr Zelenskiy earlier said that he would come to the debates on the 19th of April, and Andrei was supposed to moderate these debates if they had happened, and moderated a conference with more or less a conversation with a journalist. So, Andrei, what was that? What are your impressions? What have you learned out of this event?
I have learned practically nothing, because most of the questions were the ones that had to be asked. I don't mean that they were very much expected by the presidential side, but there were journalists who take different views on Mr. Poroshenko, and we, of course, could foresee some of the questions. Most of the answers were well known beforehand as well, because Mr. Poroshenko has talked about this several times over. For me, the major thing was to just hope that Mr. Zelensky would turn up. However, obviously, his team insists on that they dictate conditions. Under any conditions, they dictate conditions. In my opinion, if you call a person to a duel, then the person has the right to choose something. If you choose the weapons and the place, for instance, then another person chooses the time and probably a number of shots. However, Mr. Zelensky and his team deny his opponent any choice. And the counteroffensive launched by President Poroshenko, candidate Poroshenko, in this respect, gives me a kind of hope that not everything is set in stone in these elections.
Before we go into the general discussion about the policies, because I think the issue of debates is there for a week, not more. After there is the elections, we would forget about the debates, honestly. But still, what do we make out of this? You know, what are your impressions about how the campaign is going with this, you know, when the debate has become one of the biggest issues? And what should be the issues in Vladislav?
Thank you for having me on again, and kudos to my honorable colleague for understanding the laws and norms of dueling. A lost art, but obviously still practiced, and practiced well in Ukrainian politics. Yeah, we've certainly gone much further down the road of the television eating democracy here in Ukraine than we have in other parts of the world. In this, as in many other things, Ukraine and Ukrainian elections are of much interest to the rest of the world, because norms are being set here which will be followed by other people. Technological breakthroughs, political, even metaphysical changes are taking place in the way that we do democracy or conduct liberal democratic norms. So it's a remarkable time to be here in Ukraine and to observe Ukrainian elections. That's one thing. Secondly, I've for a long time I've been observing minority rights, and I write a lot about Ukrainian-Jewish relations in the Western press. And one of the most remarkable things about these elections is that in a week, if these polls are correct, Ukraine will be the only country except Israel to have both a Jewish president and a Jewish prime minister.
I still would go, like, how would you say, you're looking at the campaign, now everybody in Ukraine discusses the debate as kind of a decisive moment. Is it, and what are the most important issues in these elections for you at this point, knowing what is the gap between the candidates?
Well, I think to me it's odd now how much there is people are unsatisfied about Zelensky and Zelensky becoming president. I think the principal problem of the last 5 years was that after an anti-oligarchic revolution, Ukraine got an oligarch as president, and this president has never really addressed this principal contradiction. He has partly addressed it, but he has unfortunately not gotten out of this problem, this principal problem that he had from the beginning. And I had an article a year ago where I said, the West should get ready for a new president, because it was already visible then that he would not be re-elected, that he was just on a track, and if he would not get off this track, he would not be re-elected. Half a year ago, I wrote an article where I said that probably Tymoshenko is going to become president, because then Zelensky was not yet a candidate, and it looked that she would be. Now Zelensky is going to, but this is not the story really. It's not about Zelensky, it's about that Poroshenko has not addressed the substantive issue, and he is now trying to go into show business, so to say. And I'm just imagining now Zelensky's team telling themselves, oh, "Welcome to our world." Now you're singing on the stage there. Let us teach you how entertainment business works. You've made this about entertainment. You've made this about a show. You have moved away from the substance, from Nasirov, from Kononenko, from Latkovsky, Granovsky, Lutsenko, and all these names, and you've made it all about a show, and about Yuri Tymoshenko or Yulia Litvinenko and all this. And this is, and now we are on show business. We have now a showman who is going to be the next president. And I think Poroshenko is in a way responsible for that, because he has not addressed the substantive issues.
Olexii, you're a serious analyst, so how to get out of the show, and what should we discuss?
This should be discussed after the second round of election, what should be done. But I would like to switch on what Andres told, but from another angle. From my perspective, it was very obvious for me 1 year before, or even 2 years before, that actually the current president has almost no chances to be re-elected in a normal way. Because now, be it really Mr. Zelensky, be it Yulia Tymoshenko in the second round, or even some other candidates, except maybe Boyko or somebody from this, let's call it, very adjacent to
even
Russian...
Boyko was in some of the projections winning.
Yes,
against
the problem was that the majority of the people here in the country, they have fully right to be fed up with Mr. Poroshenko personally and with whole his team, because they did not deliver, not only according to expectations which the people had in 2014, but even according to some normal rules. And then, what did actually Mr. Zelensky, what makes, from my perspective, it looks psychologically furious, Mr. Poroshenko, they are playing on different fields. If Zelensky would have played on the same, let's call it, political field, then Poroshenko would have a chance with all administrative resources, with all this quite well built around all the country networks, with all the pressure, with all deals, with all these groups, as it was the case with Tymoshenko. He has beaten, to some, information he has not, but let's assume he has beaten Tymoshenko exactly on this field. He would have beaten even other guys in the first row on this field. But Zelensky played, I would suppose, and his team, maybe even some accidentally or maybe in person, just on another sphere. It would it was a story which was told for me just from another angle. It's about why Mr. Putin didn't cope very much with Mr. Yushchenko during negotiations, because, and this was a high-ranking diplomat who compared them about this situation when you have, okay, this supersonic jet, Su-29, on the one hand, be it Mr. Putin, for example, and then you have An-2, this Kukuruznik. They don't match. If you even want from this super jet to hire An-2, you cannot, because the speed is too high, you get out from this. They're playing on different fields. And moreover, the majority of the people, they are just looking for, regardless, some change in the country, because they do understand they have no chance in this country to survive for the next 5 years, and this is maybe their last chance to change something.
I would say that there is another graph we have. It's about the motive to vote for the candidate in the second round, again done by the rating group, where it said that in case of, while voting for Poroshenko, 75% of the people vote for Poroshenko, 22 more or less they are just against Zelensky. In case of Volodymyr Zelenskiy, 57% of the people vote for Volodymyr Zelenskiy, and in 41% against Poroshenko. I've talked to many analysts, and they say, like, it doesn't look good for the country. You can't vote just as a protest vote. It's negative, it's critical, it's put the country in a very, very vulnerable moment at risk. What do we make about that? You know, about the whole idea about the protest vote? Are you concerned? What are your concerns?
I am concerned because I face a stark choice whom to vote for. Or do I vote against both? Or do I just spoil my ballot paper? You know, my candidate did not make it to the second round. And I'm not satisfied with either of those who stand on the ballot.
Andreas, what Ukraine may do with that, because as well, we've had the big international security forum this week, and I talked to numerous, I guess we all talked to many experts, and they say, like, it doesn't look good for Ukraine. Doesn't it really look good for Ukraine, the whole elections, besides being transparent?
Well, I think,
or maybe there is a way to explain.
Now, you know, last year I wrote an article about Tymoshenko. Now I'm going to say that we have to prepare for a Zelensky presidency, and people are going to think that I'm on Zelensky's team. But we are now at a stage where we have to think how is this presidency going to work, and how is the state going to work with such an inexperienced president? This is going to be a very risky, especially the first months are going to be probably quite embarrassing with somebody like Zelensky as president, and he's going to make probably a lot of mistakes, and he needs advisors. He needs basically at every step he does, he needs somebody to tell him what to do, because this is not Sluga Naroda. This is not the TV series Servant of the People. And I'm not sure he even knows how more difficult this new job he's going to get into. This is not just another project, you know. This is not. I'm afraid that people on his team think of this as a project, and you know they did, you know, the TV series and the show and Rasmishi Komika and all these sort of, and now they have the presidency, and they still don't understand that this is really a very serious situation, but I think is now time already to think about this.
Olexii?
Yeah, I would like to agree and disagree at the same time, because on the one hand, if you have the normal system, it's really very risky to have the person who is totally unexperienced, although, let's be honest, each of the president before and even current president, despite they had some kind, let's call it political experience, they did not imagine about the full scale of the responsibility of the president, of the problem of the president, of this pressure that you are the person each day, really, despite Sundays, Mondays, each day, 24 hours you have this pressure. Many of them, they experience all this only the first day when they came in office, and I suppose none of them were very happy exactly of this pressure. They were happy about many other elements of the presidential post, but nevertheless. But on the other side of the story, now we're having another moment, which we had to some extent in 1991, 2004, 2014, when, on the one hand, there were clear message from the people, from the vast majority of the people, guys, we would like to have something different. We would like to change the whole system. And each of the time before, unfortunately, let's call it not political elite, but the political system and all adjacent people to this system, they did not answer this actually very vivid, articulated address of the people. Now, once more, we have this address from the majority of the people of Ukraine. We would like to reload the whole system, and in this case, it could be, because it's very risky, Zelensky could be the person exactly for this moment to reload the whole system, because he is absolute outsider of the system. If we take, for example, Yulia Tymoshenko, many other persons, they are more or less insiders with many networks. It's a very risky moment. For Zelensky himself, he doesn't even imagine in what complicated situation the whole country inside and outside is. It's very risky, but nevertheless, I would say it's more chance if we are looking for the whole reload of the political system. It's much more easier to do by Zelensky than by Poroshenko, Tymoshenko and other people, because they have very vast prehistory which would prevail them to do this.
And what the show polls and the survey, this being an experience, it's for quite a few people, this is a critical thing, but for some of the people, it's a good thing. Vladislav, you had a chance to meet Volodymyr Zelenskiy together with the French philosopher Bernard-Henri Lévy. You had a meeting. Henri Lévy had written later about that. So what's your impression? Yes, that's how we do. We keep guessing. We all keep guessing.
You know, he hasn't spent very much time with lots of people. My friend Bernard and I went to see him. We spent about I think like 80, 90 minutes with him the day before the first vote. I came away from the meeting. Well, one wants to be generous. First of all, I mean, he's probably going to be the next head of state. So when he becomes the head of state, we should give him an opportunity, if not a chance, then at least an opportunity. One should be generous, and one should hope for the best. One should not be totally negative from the get-go. My reading of him, he was extraordinarily charismatic. The aura was much more than I had expected. He has a great swagger. He has a great charm. He has wit. He's psychologically quick. He sizes up people very quickly. I suspect he's emotionally intelligent, and he picks up on other people's motivations quickly. These are all good things in negotiations. These are really good things for dealing with interlocutors, political opponents, your own friends, your own enemies. So there are lots of things that I got from spending about an hour and a half with him, which I was very impressed with. In many ways, he is an impressive man. He's an impressive young man. His energy is fantastic. There were things which were exactly what I would have expected them to be. I don't think he's a populist, at least by Western normative standards, or whatever one's category taxonomy is for populism. I don't necessarily think he's a populist, and that question will be settled soon enough, probably. Is he a liberal in the way that we're looking at a wave of liberal presidents and heads of state executives coming to power all over the West and in some places outside the West? Remains to be seen. I suspect he's a Democrat. Let's give him generous welcome to liberal democracy and hope that he is a Democrat. I did try to ask one or two harsh questions. Let's say I was a bit more harsh than other people at the meeting. There were three of us from our side on the meeting, and Mr. Zelensky and two of his primary advisors. He answered. He answered with great concern. I mean, some of the conversation was off the record. So the question that I asked him, without going into specifics, he answered very quickly and with great concern, and it seemed to me maybe a little bit too emotionally. So I'm not certain about his temperament anymore, having gone into the meeting than I am now, right?
We were following, let's say, three meetings, but one the most, which has happened recently this week. This is the meeting with the candidates, with the Western leaders, with the most important European leaders for Ukraine. So yesterday, was it yesterday, day before yesterday, Volodymyr Zelensky, was it this Friday, Volodymyr Zelensky had met François Macron, the French president. Here you can see this short video. The Élysée Palace had, you see Alexander Daniluk as well near, and Rябошапка, who was former also anti-corruption person here in Ukraine, fighting anti-corruption person. So this is, we see this video. It was symbolic for a lot of us that at the same time President Poroshenko, we also can see that in way more formal atmosphere, had met François Macron. Of course, it was in the list. It was important for Paris to show that both candidates are met. However, we see that Angela Merkel had met just the President Poroshenko. That was by some people criticized by Berlin, criticized in Berlin, but that's the case. So I would like to ask your just general remark on what it all means, how we can read it, and I would like apologize. The French president is Emmanuel Macron. That was my kind of misspelling. And
François.
Because it's France, yeah. So, how do you read this, and as well, how we can, see also this move from Berlin?
Well, I guess it's a bit of a division of roles here, and obviously Macron was sort of more fitting Western leader. Merkel has built up a very close relationship with Poroshenko during the last years. I don't think these meetings play that much of a role. They are purely sort of diplomatic or purely sort of on a psychological level. I think the main thing here is perhaps for Zelensky to learn out of these meetings how they work, and how the atmosphere is, and to get quickly into the mood for these sort of very formalistic meetings, and the whole work of I think that's going to be maybe a problem for him. There's a lot of rituals, lots of formal, lots of official things you have to do that are in a way totally boring. You go somewhere, you sit, and you exchange something, some trivial phrases, and that was it basically. And that's the job of a president. But you have to do it in the right way. You shouldn't be embarrassing when you do that. And so that's now sort of also, I guess, a lesson for him how this all works.
Would you like to add on that?
Yes, because for me it was quite interesting story. First I got the information that there will be, at first there was an information that there will be a meeting between Mrs. Merkel and Mr. Poroshenko. I was a little bit astonished because actually the all signals before the elections from the German part was that none of the visits will be from our side to you because we don't want to interfere in your electoral all the sins. And why I was astonished that 1 week before exactly the election, Mrs. Merkel is going to meet with Mr. Poroshenko, and I found this quite a little bit tricky, although after the message came that afterwards, or the same day, there will be a meeting between Macron and Zelensky, then I did understand that there was a previous, I suppose, agreement between Merkel and Macron, how to get both first of all, to test Mr. Zelensky, to get impression about Mr. Poroshenko, what he's going to do in general, and especially what he's going to do if he's going to lose. And this is quite, I would say, good signal from France and Germany to Ukraine, that they still are feeling somehow engaged into the whole scene. They would like to clarify some things, to fix some things, regardless who is in power in Ukraine. What will be in the case of the victory of Mr. Zelensky with, first of all, Normandy format, and then this, let's call it personal networks, which, let's be honest, I do agree that Mr. Poroshenko succeeded to get quite a good relations, personal relations with Mrs. Merkel, which actually is quite important. Moreover, he met in Berlin not only Mrs. Merkel, but actually the successor, and I suppose it was a meeting in our embassy with Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer, which is quite important, who is going to be actually, in normal case, maybe, the next chancellor under normal relations. So it's quite, on the one hand, positive signal. On the other, by Macron, I suppose, very much, regardless of his very pragmatic approach, but he's also some kind of personalistic person who cares much about real personal relations, his attitudes, be it positive or negative to some things. So for me, it is a question to what extent Mr. Zelensky succeeded to get quite more or less good impression by Mr. Macron, because by Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer it will not be the case, be it positive, good or not. She's a little bit like Mrs. Merkel, quite not very emotionally driven figure.
One of the concerns which I've heard a lot by the Western partners, it's about the fact that Volodymyr Zelenskiy had brought this idea about referendum over Ukraine's NATO accessions. Zelensky himself clarifies many times that he's in favor, but that should be the referendum. And I had a chance to talk to the former Deputy Secretary General of NATO, Alexander Verzbo, asking also this question. Alexander Verzbo had been here during the security forum in Kiev this week.
You know, people celebrate the fact that Ukraine is a country that can have free and fair elections, and you don't know the outcome in advance. So it's a sign of progress on consolidation of democracy. That said, there's a lot of people wondering what exactly is the agenda for Volodymyr Zelenskiy, and particularly what will be his policy towards the West, towards NATO, and towards Russia. And there's a lot of unknowns, so people are watching closely. Well, people are interested in what he means when he says that he's ready to negotiate face-to-face with Putin over the Donbass, and also his view on the other international partners and how he intends to deal with the Donbass. There are questions about why he has proposed the referendum on NATO when it's already been settled in terms of the Constitution. Does this imply any differences between him and Poroshenko and other leaders? The basic idea of having a referendum is a democratic procedure, which it's up to Ukraine to determine whether it's appropriate. President Poroshenko has talked about a referendum at the appropriate time when Ukraine is actually submitting its application for membership a few years from now. So the question in everybody's mind is, there something different in Zelenskyy's mind? Is this seen as a way to slow down the train toward NATO or to accelerate it? Nobody really knows what it means. But I think allies don't have any strong view about this. I think they all are sort of cautious about the issue of Ukrainian membership right now, simply because the war continues in Donbass. Russia is consolidating its control over Crimea, continuing to behave aggressively. So I think the focus is on supporting Ukraine's ability to defend itself in the immediate term, and to otherwise help Ukraine consolidate its democracy as the best solution.
What are the plans of the West anyways, because it requires some kind of planning and thinking ahead, not just like being kind of concerned, and there is a chance you maybe won't get the questions within a couple of days, won't get an answers.
Sure, yeah. Well, I don't know concretely, but normally in a situation like this, when there's a high probability of a change in the leadership and maybe in the orientation, that both an embassy here in Kiev and the foreign policy establishment back home will kind of develop a strategy for early engagement with the new leadership for kind of an effort to address particular policy issues where we want to maintain solidarity, look at ways to steer the policies of a new administration in the direction of Western values and open economic relations.
Doesn't matter what Ukraine has to do, doesn't matter who is the leader, there would be the parliament election. What are they? What are these priorities if you look at the paths of the reforms?
General disappointment in the West with the loss of momentum on reform, and the fact that so many reforms have been left incomplete. For example, the new election code stuck in the second reading. We had this fiasco where the court struck down the illicit enrichment law, leaving a big void in the anti-corruption legislation. The High Anti-Corruption Court, the judges are still not appointed, and so that court, even though it was officially established months ago, is not functioning. The Prosecutor General's office clearly has lost a lot of its credibility. Change is needed there. There's a long list of things we'd like to see happen, and I think the main thing is we need to see much more commitment to reform across the party lines. There can't be the sort of partisanship that has contributed to this sort of deadlock on so many important reforms. That's where the new president hopefully can strike some kind of grand bargain with the leaders of all the political parties, or the majority of them, to have a broad pro-reform coalition. So this time Ukraine will succeed where it has repeatedly failed in the past.
I would also remind that the full version of all our interviews, reports, you can find at the Hromadske international webpage, en.hromadske.ua. As well, there are more stories and analysis on our social media pages, Hromadske International Facebook and Hromadske International Twitter. So please search and sign up for our weekly newsletter, which you can do going again to our webpage. We just heard this comment. My general is, because we can discuss a lot about the foreign policy of Mr. Zelensky, which we do not really know to the details. But a lot of Ukrainian colleagues of mine are asking, what are the people in the West are thinking? And what I also heard, at least from the embassies, that, you know, we understand there is a campaign in Ukraine. And we understand that so far, it's not up to us, and maybe there is a limit to how much the candidates should talk to us and appeal to us. So what would you think, what is lacking? Because of course I've heard many kind of critical remarks by the Western experts that we don't have the answers, But should they really be at this stage of the campaign?
Well, frankly, I don't care what Western experts think. Much more important for me is that so far, Mr. Zelensky and his team avoid, I think, communication with the Ukrainians. And if such a person as Vladislav here comes out of meeting Mr. Zelensky impressed, then I think that they do have something to tell Ukrainians. And if I were his advisor, I would advise him to go and talk to Ukrainian press, Ukrainian journalists. They've been avoiding this. I've been in communication correspondence with his press service for I don't know how long. Not to speak about the candidate himself, I cannot get an important person from his team for my radio show. So I am prepared to give Mr. Zelensky the benefit of the doubt, especially if he is a quick learner. I've seen former Ukrainian presidents learn very quick, not to mention even Mr. Yanukovych. There was a period when he learned very well until his surrounding was changed, and then there was decline. I think that with all the traps and difficulties that may await Mr. Zelensky if he is elected, with a strong team, he may overcome.
Andreas.
Maybe to come back to the NATO issue, I think that's in a way an illustration what this is all about. It's that the old political class screwed up. And there was in 2006 a chance for Ukraine to get the membership action plan. But what happened is that Yanukovych then became prime minister and went to Brussels and told the people in Brussels that Ukrainians don't want to get into NATO. And then this chance was lost. Boris Tarasyuk is telling the story all the time. And the detail about all of this situation in 2006 was, of course, that Petro Poroshenko was part and parcel of this entire conflict in the Orange Coalition. And that, you know, Yanukovych became prime minister because Yushchenko and Tymoshenko couldn't get along, and Poroshenko was Yushchenko's attack dog against Tymoshenko. Then Yanukovych came and screwed up the NATO issue, as the old class screwed up many other things, also the NATO issue and the EU issue and then the economy and so on. And that's why people are now voting for Zelensky. And I'm not surprised that they are not giving an answer, because Zelensky is not a politician and he doesn't have a political team. They don't have answers because they are not from the political class. That's not their business. They're business. They're show business people. And you ask them some political issues and they wouldn't know, because that's not their biography, because they are not from politics.
I don't care for Western experts' opinion. I did not mean Andreas.
But I would reiterate, by the all respect to Andreas, that really, to this question, I really do support this thesis. Much more we should care about the reaction from the Ukrainian people than to any reaction from Western experts. As for the embassy guys, if they are telling they really don't know about Mr. Zelensky or what he's thinking about some issues, this is according to previous Soviet system is dvoika. This is their job. This is their job to know, especially now, every much more or less important Western embassy or in general embassy situated in Ukraine should know, concrete people in Zelensky's team should know approximately what it's about. Otherwise, they are not good diplomats. I'm telling as a diplomat former. And then to the question of NATO, quite interesting thing. I suppose he, on purpose, and he's right in this, and his team, doesn't tell anything to this question, because if you look, this is voting, who is voting for Mr. Zelensky even in the first row, not telling about the second row, which now you've told about the percentage which he's getting. And the vast majority of those who turned from the first round to him approximately in the second round actually are the people who are not in favor of NATO. That's why he is on purpose just don't touching anything about NATO, telling in general, yes, we're supporting going to the West, but the details should be somehow settled. And I suppose the idea about referendum, which is during Kyiv Security Forum from Ukrainian official participants were totally just defamated, and from many Westerners defamated, but I found the idea quite well. Why? Because actually all these legislative changes have been adopted during exactly 1 year before the election. Why? Because they saw there was some kind of drop of popularity of this issue, and they tried just to fix for the next team maybe to come. That's why we need, in order to be very sustainable, in order to really go in this direction, we need legitimacy from the people. To some extent, be it referendum, be it other instruments. Otherwise, what is now? Now the problem of EU and NATO here in Ukraine is that Mr. Poroshenko took all this issue on himself. I'm pro-EU, pro-NATO, I'm the single defender of all these things. If now Poroshenko is going to lose, he is automatically, because it's very clear fixed juncture, he can bring with his actually not a victory, all these issues behind. And this is very bad story. We need to decouple these things, regardless of political figures. We have something. Next president will come, but he will go or she will go the same course. And Mr. Poroshenko on purpose did this very fixed juncture with these issues.
I would like to say that, yes, we didn't have a chance to have the real face-to-face interview with Volodymyr Zelenskiy, but my colleague had went to Kryvyi Rih, to the place from where Volodymyr Zelenskiy is, where his family lives, and managed to talk shortly to their parents and record a short comment of Rima Zelenskaya, the mother of Vladimir.
Потому что я себя сейчас заболела, и с этими выборами чувствую себя так плохо, я уже эту грязь не могу слышать. Мы с мужем не можем это переносить. Он порядочный, честный парень. То, что он заработал своим трудом деньги. Вот. Это же не он не крал. Вот. Ну скажите, сколько можно поливать грязью человека? То у него нету программы, то у него нету людей в команде, то, что он кремлевский. Во-первых, он хочет, чтобы первая закончилась война. Но это же невозможно, чтобы столько детей на Украине погибло. Понимаете? Но это же уже не в силах это продолжать. Сколько же оно может продолжаться? Он закончил школу с 2 четверками, закончил институт. Он юрист по образованию. Он же не артист по образованию. Он юрист по образованию. И все. Ну неужели считают его уже таким дебилом, таким дураком? И все. Он всегда людям помогал, всегда принимал участие в школе. Можете даже классного руководителя спросить, как можно так человека уничтожать из-за того, что ему не нужны деньги. Поверьте, здесь, как президент, он будет получать меньше, чем он получает. Он просто хотел, чтобы в Украине все изменилось, чтобы молодежь не уезжала, чтобы молодежь была на местах здесь. И все. Оно ему не надо деньги, он обеспеченный человек, ему ничего не нужно. Просто он не может смотреть, как у нас люди живут. У нас пенсионеры получают копейки. У нас пенсию получит, а на лекарства не может купить женщина. Что же это такое в стране происходит? Коррупция за коррупцией. Понабивал все карманы себе этими деньгами и вывозит, и все, что творится, это же ужас, какой-то кошмар. И все. А его в чем обвиняют, я не понимаю. За то, что он хочет, чтобы изменилась Украина.
And I encourage also you to support Hromadske and donate. You can find the donate button at Hromadske International en.hromadske.ua webpage. That would make us possible to do this kind of stories and to do more human stories, not just political analysis, which are doing, but show a bit kind of a broader picture of Ukraine. So, and thanks a lot for your support if you have already done it. My question would be on something else, which we hadn't discussed, an elephant in the room. Zelensky is playing a huge anti-oligarch sentiment. His biggest critique is that he is supported by a businessman, Igor Kolomoisky. The series Zelensky plays are broadcasted, but 1+1 TV channel owned by Kolomoisky. So that's where the concern are. What do we make with that? How we can deal with that? What should be done? Where are the concerns?
Stay cool. Remember that whoever makes it to the second round, it is Ukrainian voters ultimately that make to the second round, and they will make it to the next election. And I think that the biggest danger that we may face is that if Mr. Zelensky is a failure, which I do not say he necessarily is or will be, there will be calls for his forcible removal. I think we should give him a full term, unless, of course, he decides to quit.
That generous spirit is something I would, as an outsider, very much double down on. Absolutely.
Still, what do we make with his contact with Igor Kolomoisky as well? Because yes, I know that there are other oligarchs which are concerned about redistribution. Just having that, there would be another guy who would just take the money of the rest of the oligarchs.
Okay, look, Mr. Kolomoisky is a fantastical figure. He's also a dangerous player in the game. He's one of 7 to 10 such players. One can look at it in both ways. I tend to think that, and I think knowing that some of the people inside the inner apparat are certainly Kolomoisky people, if only because Mr. Zelensky went much further, much quicker than he probably ever, or anyone ever expected him to go. He just had never had the chance to build up an apparat, an inner sanctum of advisors. With all due respect to Mr. Daniluk, who I've boundless respect for, will he listen to a guy like that? We'll find out. But Mr. Kolomoisky's people are, I think, one of several fractions around the possible next president, vying for attention. They're probably not the only fraction. How much attention he gives them as opposed to the people that he grew up with, or reformers or other shareholders who will quickly flock to him as soon as he does take power, it's an open question. Every other serious presidential candidate in the system also had and would have to have serious oligarchic ties to ever get this far. So he's not unique. He's certainly not worse or better on that issue than anybody else.
Unless there is quite a level of hypocrisy, if that's the true, that's the different thing.
I would say, first of all, I'm not going to be totally on the side of those who are clearly now telling that Mr. Zelensky is just some kind of puppet of Mr. Kolomoisky and he will be in close junction electing or voting for Mr. Zelensky. It means that you are electing or voting for Mr. Kolomoisky. No. Each of the story, including Ukraine, looks quite a good example of Yanukovych and Akhmetov. Everybody before election of Yanukovych told that Yanukovych is about Akhmetov, a puppet, and what we had at the end, actually Akhmetov had a lot of troubles with Yanukovych. He gained profits as well, but he had a lot of troubles. That's why, and this is the position or psychology of the presidential posture, regardless which obligations you had before, regardless of each of the networks you had before, after you are president and you do understand your own capacity, your own possibilities, be it in negative or positive way, immediately you start to position yourself in quite a different position. And here I see even the most risk for Mr. Kolomoisky, because Zelensky, if he's going to be elected, he can take, in case of some signals from Kolomoisky, I'm here, I'm looking for some gains, exactly to make it very vivid to the whole population of Ukraine, I'm not the puppet of Kolomoisky, exactly the harsh reaction from Zelensky towards Kolomoisky. This could happen, but Kolomoisky, I suppose, quite a smart guy. He's not going to play this game. And plus, if, for example, Vladislav met Zelensky, I have not, he can tell much more about just psychological nature of Mr. Zelensky, but not meeting him, I would say he quite a tough person. He is not going to be a puppet of anybody. That's why I'm not fearing about Mr. Zelensky, be it some kind clearly linked to Kolomoisky being obliged to doing in this agenda. The other thing, it's about the concrete persons he is going to appoint, because president has a lot of capacity. And for me, for example, in my sphere, foreign policy and security, it will be clear signals who will be positioned by the president or appointed by him to what persons. And after this, I can tell you to 90% what the foreign policy will be.
To fight.
Yeah,
Andreas.
This aspect makes me actually also somewhat more optimistic, because as Vladislav rightly said, Zelensky looks like a populist to a Western observer. He looks a bit like Trump or Beppe Grillo. He is sort of this outsider who comes in. But the context here is in so far different that you have really a bad political class, and that that the context is a difference. So the Western political classes are also not very, very good. But still, I think the degree of corruption of the political class is here much higher, and therefore the decision for somebody like Zelensky looks to me more rational in a way than electing Trump as president, because the political class, the American, is different from the Ukrainian. And I think also that for Zelensky it will be difficult to be seen as an instrument of Kolomoisky, because he comes on this anti-oligarchic wave. And in a way, if he loses this image of being a fighter against oligarchy, if he's going to be perceived as an instrument of Kolomoisky, then his whole aura is going to go. But because there's nothing else he can sort of provide, really.
But I'd like to find out, we still don't know who will be the president. There are polls, we know them, yet there is still the full week ahead. A lot of things can happen, and my question is more about the legacy of Petro Poroshenko, his actions. Within this last weeks, as never before, President had been talking to the press, answering the questions, firing the corrupt people, like doing a lot of good things, and a lot of people say, yes, it looks like maybe he had changed. Andrei, you had a chance finally to talk to the president, because you've been, as we started with this not a debate today, you had a chance to talk, so really maybe give us also the feeling, because later President Poroshenko anyways would stay in the politics, and also what we can expect from the second term of Petro Poroshenko.
Actually, I didn't have a chance to talk to the president even for a minute before the so-called debate started.
You had a chance to talk to his team, yeah?
Yes, I only talked to his team. From my point of view, Mr. Poroshenko was too late in making all these changes. Too little, too late. I know that, well, from inner sources, that some of the decisions that he put a stake on were under were there for months, if not for years, including the foreign policy decisions. I remember when he announced a new train to Mariupol right on the eve of the first tour of voting. That's not the things are done, however you say. I know, I've seen many people, I have changed myself. I know that people may change, but I think that for Mr. Poroshenko, if he changed, then this change came too late. And I've seen him change a couple of times. I remember Mr. Poroshenko on Maidan. I spoke to him, if not every day, then every other day, he produced an impression of a different person than he became half a year ago. And that's what Olexii here was saying. When you are a president, you are a different person.
Thanks a lot for the discussion. I really wanted in this program to explain what's going on, what are the debates here, but not just look a bit ahead, because we can really battle now who likes whom, but I think it's time where we can, look at some kind of plan a bit ahead. So thanks a lot for being with us. There was Andreas Umland, an analyst and the senior research fellow at the Institute for Euro-Atlantic Cooperation, and Kolomoisky, who is the head of the board of the Hromadske Radio, the editor-in-chief of the Odessa Review Vladislav Davidzon. So read the magazine, of course, and Olexii Semenii, the political analyst director of the Institute for Global Transformations. So stay tuned. I would also, we don't have chance to and don't have space to present more stories in Ukraine besides the elections. So I would really ask you to go to the Hromadske social media platforms, and as well to look in particular the story we brought from the annexed Crimea to the 5 years of annexation, our documentary we've done, which is named The Price of Life, the Price of Annexation Life. There is little time and interest today of the international experts to what's going on there, because we are all intrigued by the elections, but there are a lot of things happening there, many people arrested, so please go look beyond general election agenda and follow us on social media 24/7. And with that, I say you thank you, and there would be a lot of coverage this week.